Everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Tabletop Role-Playing Gaze. Now, this is a redo of one of the, I want to say it's, three now videos on my channel, and this is a redo of how to prep your minis. Because what I did was something called Rush, because I wanted to crank out a video and I didn't want to deal with a whole bunch of things. I'm trying to test. Okay, autofocus is on. Beautiful. Basically what happened was I didn't want to run through all the steps because I didn't want to run into an issue of something taking too long in editing, but then I remembered bones don't usually take all that much prep work, so I can still do the prep work, show you guys the info and how I do things and how to prep minis, and then move on your way. Now, this is the one that I was showing you guys how to prep in the last video because he's massive. And if you can see, or I showed you guys the mold lines, or not mold lines, the gaps down here, if autofocus will work, which it doesn't seem to want to. Oh, there we go. It's not nearly as deep. Like, there's a pronounced line, but it's not super distinctly a gap. There are mold lines that I want to fix, like on the ribs. There's that, like, flashing right there. I didn't get rid of that, which I should have. And you can also see that he's starting to get limbo legs again, even after I heated him down and bent him. He should be leaning forward a little bit further. So what I'm probably going to do is put him, I don't know. I heated it up in almost boiling water, and he's still leaning back. I'm okay with him leaning back a bit, but he's leaning back a little bit too far compared to the flat base. So, that's it. That's an issue. Well, I'll work on that. He's also up above on my desk where the radiator is, down on the wall. So that probably connected. And then this is the finished, assembled model of the Demon King of Death that I told, or Demon Lord of Death that I told you my friends would make fun of. I showed him to them, and they agreed that is someone they would make fun of. But today, we are working on one and maybe two minis, depending. I have a D&D game going on at 7. It's currently like 6:05, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to get through both of these. But I have the Reaper, Darkhaven Bones, Manticore, and Behir. Both of these are cool monsters. Manticore's a little different than the ones I usually look at. And the Behir is also a little bit different, but that's because Reaper, the last time I'm aware, doesn't have licensing to D&D or Wizards of the Coast monsters. So they can make things really close or make things out of mythology, but they can't make them directly match the designs of Wizards of the Coast that are in the monster manual and whatnot. So things are always going to be a little bit different. The issue is that out of all 4 of these models, the Behir, the Manticore, the Skeleton, and the Demon Lord of Death, I don't know which one I want to paint. Well, I want to paint all of them, but I don't know which one I want to go for in this process of Uno Momento. I need to look for a book. I love this book, but whenever I need it, it is nowhere to be found. Now, is that something about the book, or is that just my terrible organizational skills? You've been watching enough videos here to know that it's both. Oh, nope, it's exactly where I thought it was. I just didn't see it. My bad, y'all. Oh, come on. Don't be fussy. This is also what happens when you stack all of your belongings in one pile. Come on. So this is a really cool book. This is the first D&D book I ever owned. And you're probably looking at it going, what the hell is that? That's not a D&D book. And you're right, but you're also wrong. This is owned, it was published, by Mirrorstone. Oh, come on, there we go. Which is trademark of Wizards of the Coast, Inc. Every monster in this is a licensed D&D monster. Most of these already have stat blocks, but this is kind of like an early Volo's guide, where it talks to you all about vampire lairs, the undead, different types of giants, fire giants, hill giants, storm giants, ettins, trolls, bugbears, goblinoids, different shapeshifters. Here and here, the Behir. Ta-da. It's sick. I really want to do that, but the issue is I don't know if I have the colors that I would want to use to do that. I might try it. And then there's the harpies, gargoyles. There's manticores, which are super cool. And now I'm running into an issue with my computer because it seems to love, like I have it to never go to sleep and to never do anything when I have my thing plugged in, so that I can record with my laptop plugged in and have it never run into issues. But then it does things like this and just kind of still turns off the screen, and then it creates lapses in the recording for some reason. But then there's the D&D Manticore. Here's an Earthak, which is like really cool looking. But this book I got before I knew what D&D was when I was like, I got this when I was like 6. And then somebody told me, like, there's the classic Remmer has. A little bit cooler looking than my actual painting. Painted mini, but that was my foray into the monsters of D&D. It was just this cool book, and it's just a cool book, and having the Behir reminded me of that. But anyway, to prep minis, you're gonna need a couple things. Now this depends on company, kind, a whole bunch of stuff, but I'm gonna run over the generals. Super glue, for sure. Baking soda, not baking powder, baking soda. A little thing to scoop baking soda. I have a little sculpting tool. I'm gonna need a paintbrush for dusting off baking soda and for washing stuff off. Maybe a pin vise drill. It really depends. These are cool. It has a little back part that spins, and you put it in your thumb, like in that little gap, and you put a drill bit in here, and you twist, and it drills with friction, but not nearly the high friction of speed. If you're doing a model from a sprue or something with lots of flashing, you need clippers. I got this and a thing of pliers for like $4. Super useful. I use them for almost every mini. You also might need some metal files, but I prefer these. These are little plastic sanding needles. They're kind of like oblong in shape. They have a really pointy end. Oops. And then a chiseled end. And you can use those to file down the tricky bits. And then if you're doing super fine detail stuff, micro brushes. These are used primarily, at least for me, for using super glue. If I want to get it very precisely into a spot and then put baking soda on it to create like a raised edge or a seal, or to like fill in a gap, I use these to get a little bit more control if it's a smaller area. You also need soapy water and clean water. Now, that's to wash off any mold release. You might also, depending on how warped the model may be, need warm water and cold water. Now, that was in the last video. Neither of these models really need any adjusting whatsoever. And so I'm not going to be able to show you that, but like for the other one that I was showing you was bowing a little bit more. You dunk it in really, really hot water. You bend it back into place. You let it cool down a little bit. Once it's cooled down a little bit and stiffened, you can dunk it into the cold water without having to hold it in the cold water, like with your hands. You can just kind of sit it in the cold water, and then it will harden and hopefully stay in that position. And you're also going to need, not this obviously super extensive carving set, but you just need X-Acto knife blades like this, and an X-Acto knife holder like that. And that's just to get rid of any really, really tricky bits. And yeah, that's really it you need for prepping minis. And don't mind my arm reaching across the screen. I occasionally run my finger across the touchpad of my computer in order to make sure that the screen doesn't go off and keep like weird like lag spikes in my recording. That being said, let's get started with the Manticore. Now, there's a couple parts. There's this bottom leg, or not bottom leg, there's the bottom part, which is the base. Excuse me. There's two wings. Then there's a front leg and a back leg, and the body. I can already tell you right now, just by feeling it, it's a little greasy. Now, what a lot of people do is they wash their stuff off first, and typically I would agree with that. Well, not even just typically. I would like to agree with that, but the issue I run into is I feel like there's also lots of unintentionally being oil on like your X-Acto blades and on your hands and on all of your tools just from working with stuff over time. And whether or not you realize it, sometimes it does. So what I usually like to do is I like to do any cleanup work I want to do on individual parts, and then I wash them just to really make sure they're nice and clean before I put them together. So one of the first things I do is I get rid of any flashing, and I forgot these are stark white, so they're a little bright in this light, but it's a really nice sculpt if it'll focus at all. See, autofocus is turned on, but the fact that it doesn't focus leads me to believe that it's a liar. But like the scorpion tail, it's all really, really cool. So basically, what I do is I just look for any parts where there's an issue with mold lines or flashing. Now, mold lines are where almost all molds are in two parts, and then they put whatever material it is they're casting into it, and then bada bing, bada boom, you pull it out, it's done. When you separate those molds, of course it focuses when I'm not actually trying to do it, and I'm just gesturing like a fool. Oh, there's some mold lines in here. I'll do this while I'm talking. Mold lines, there ends up being like lines of plastic where it seeps out a tiny bit in the mold where the things are put together. Now, are mold lines a super big deal? Well, it depends on who you ask, and it depends on the model. And also depends on how big the line is and where it is. If there's a giant line streaking down the face, you might want to take care of that. But if there's like a slight line in like all of this fur texture on the back, focus, no? Okay, well there's like this line of fur down the back that turns into spines, which is really cool. You don't really need to worry about that because that line's already kind of hidden. But like if there's lines on the back of spines, you might want to get rid of those. And I'm personally sharpening them up a little bit because the spines, in order to make sure that they don't break when they're taken out of the mold, the tips don't break, they make them a little thicker than they need to be. And since I'm not going to handle them super duper roughly, I keep pulling it up close to my face, I'm sorry. I'm just going to sharpen them up a little bit and make them look a little bit, I almost just used edgier the wrong way, make them have a little bit more of an edge and give them a little bit more definition and sharpness and aggressiveness because it's a Manticore. Granted, they parent and raise their cubs, which props to them. I wouldn't want to raise a Manticore cub. But yeah, for something that raises their cubs, they're still pretty metal. And I'm just gonna sharpen up the edge of the scorpion tail a little bit. Oh god, I keep pulling it close to my face, I'm sorry. I'm just like pulling it out of the view of everybody that's like watching. So with mold lines, you can either use the sharp bladed bit of your knife and cut, like I just did there to like sharpen this up. Or you can also do something that takes away a little bit less material, but that being said, it also takes away a little bit less material, which is using the back or like the flat edge of your, oh no, come on, see, you might see a lapse in the video here, or maybe even a lapse in recording because my screen goes to screensaver mode even though I have it set in my settings to never do that. At least when I'm plugged in, which, surprise, surprise, I am. There's a little bit of plastic on the end here that isn't super where I want it to be, so I'm just gonna snip that off. But you can use the blade side of the X-Acto knife, but not in a cutting motion, and just kind of scrape. And usually, at least with Reapers, with the slightly softer plastic, that's enough to get things off, because sometimes you run the risk of scraping a little too hard and then end up getting rid of a cool detail. That being said, if you get rid of a cool detail, okay, just like sculpt it back in. Okay, never mind. I don't take that advice. Just try to avoid getting rid of details, because sculpting back in details, while it is cool, at least for me personally, is not something that is easy. And it's much better to avoid making mistakes that you have to fix than to go through the arduous process of learning how to fix mistakes, which you're gonna probably have to do eventually, but regardless. Now I'm just gonna give them one last quick once over and make sure there's no massive things I want to change. And it looks pretty solid. There's really nowhere I want to file, except actually, I'm a liar. There is indeed, right here at the end of the tail. There's a little bit that I couldn't quite get to with my X-Acto knife, and this is where these come into handy. They're kind of diamond shaped, so you can get that edge right in there and really clear out any material that I couldn't get with my knife. And now the edge is a little bit more pronounced. Oh, there's that autofocus. Oh, nope, now it's gone. Such a shame. And I'm also going to get rid of some of the stuff in here. Now, see, there's some stuff in here, like in the teeth, that I would really love to get rid of. But then I run the risk of scraping out, you know, all of the teeth. And that's not something I want to run the risk of. So that's not something I'm going to do. Now, I'm going to commit an art sin, I'm sorry, which is sticking the water above the ferrule on a wooden brush. But I have to mix in my soap, I'm sorry. I have slightly soapy warm water, and I'm just gonna brush all this off, because otherwise it's gonna still have all of the grease and oils from my skin and all the grease and oils from keeping my X-Acto blades nice, and all of the mold release from the factory making sure that they don't fuck up. And what I'm gonna do is, I made sure this was cold water, not the, this can be slightly warm just so that you can get nicer bubbles, but this other water has to be cold, because this water is for rinsing. And also, if you don't feel like getting out like a paper towel or something, it would also be for what's it called, just letting it sit there. And you don't want to let your mini just sit there in hot water, because it's gonna get deformed otherwise. So you just gotta rinse it off. I'm just gonna put it on a paper towel. I'm gonna try to get into the cracks and get out all of the big globs of water that are sticking together, because the whole, you know, scientific dealio of cohesion and also adhesion and all that jazz. But then there's intermolecular forces, which tie into those, but let's not get into that. Can you tell I'm a bio major? So that's the main body done, and now I'm going to move on to the legs. Now, these are Reaper, so you don't have to really peg these, or not peg. God, that is really the wrong word. You don't have to pin these, but because they have like these big chunks that go into pre-made holes, but they do have not awful, but noticeable mold lines. So I'm just gonna clean those up real quick. Now that's the one nice thing, is that when you're doing molds for mass-produced minis is you can really fine-tune so that, like, if you're just doing miniatures, oh, there's my screen going again. If you're doing like custom or like very infrequently produced minis, you run into the issue of most of your molds are going to be split half and half, so that half of the body is on one side, half of the body is on the other. But with that, you run into the issue of, again, the mold line is just indiscriminately 100% down the middle, and that might get in the way of details, or like with the Manticore, the face, or things like that. But no, obviously these bits are molded separately. But if you want to build the Manticore and mold the whole thing at once, you could, because they are mass produced, take the liberty of making the mold a little bit more specialized. And I'm just kind of trying to talk to you and fill the dead space while I'm doing that, so I apologize if this is not the babble you are here for. But what you can do is, like with the line that goes down the hair, or the line going down the spikes, or on the legs, a lot of the lines follow the musculature, or on the leg, on the back leg, because it's starting to turn more scorpionish. On the back leg, you run into what's happening, which is there's like raised edges for the plates where they like bend around the leg. If this will load. See, you can see those plates? On the front part, they have the mold line running down where those line up. That's what I mean by specialized, is you can make it so that the mold line blends in a little bit better. So instead of just splitting half and half, you can make it so that your mold line, if you don't clean it up, or even if you do clean it up and you don't do it perfectly, it still looks presentable, which is honestly really cool and a huge design thing. And I'm just going to shave down the base part a little bit, and I'm sorry I brought it out of camera, but I'm working a little too close to my face. Oh, that might be a mistake. Oh well, there looks like there might be some debris caught in the plastic. There's that little black dot, which, I mean, could be debris, could just be a miscoloration in the plastic. It doesn't really create a gap or a raised bit, or, since I'm gonna prime this a flat gray, doesn't really matter. But just another thing, always look out for like heavy imperfections, like pitting, which is just what it sounds like, a pit, or like raised edges that don't look like they're supposed to be there. That's another thing, is minis always have an intended way to look, but that doesn't mean you can't change that. If there's a raised edge somewhere, ooh, I forgot to wash that one off. If there's a raised edge somewhere that you don't like, just take it off. Like, seriously, don't feel bad about it. Just take it off. If you don't like how something looks, change it. Unless it's for like a game where the way something looks is like super important. Like, I mean, that's sort of kind of the way Warhammer is, where if you as long as you dictate that this model has this, even if it doesn't have that, as long as you don't change what. So like, if you have a model that the model itself has a bolt rifle on it, and you just declare that like 3 of them have a bolt rifle, and you put like a little marker on it that says, yep, this is a bolt rifle, as long as you don't like go back later and go, oh wait, it's a, or no, if it has a bolt rifle and you want to say it has like a bolt pistol, as long as you don't go back later and go, oh wait, no, it has a bolt rifle, never mind, after they already targeted the guys that have bolt rifles because they're a little bit more dangerous, that's kind of a dick move. But like for D&D, or like things where miniatures are just like cool placeholders, you really don't gotta worry about that. You just kind of have to worry about, you know, having it look the way you want to look. If the Remmer has, usually it looks like white and blue and has like the orange spikes on the back, like I did with mine. if you don't like that color scheme, make it look different. It's that's one of the really nice things about D&D and mini painting and anything like that, really, is that it's super duper do what you want. Because unless you're like making miniatures of like, you know, shitty things, like if you're making like mini dioramas or like child porn, like that's disgusting and awful. But if you're just making a Remmer has with a little bit of a different paint job, or if like you took off two of the horns because you didn't think they looked good there, no one's gonna give a shit, and if they do, they're wrong. Well, they're not necessarily wrong, but they shouldn't be giving you shit about it. You can do what you want as long as no one is inherently harmed, and frankly, the color scheme of your Remmer has no impact on the quality of my life. And that's just that. Oh, there we go. That's a good example of pitting. Down here. Right there. If it'll focus. See? There's a little hole right there. And a little bit of plastic that came off. And the easiest thing to do is just, boop, gone. Problem solved. Ta-da. Now, if that was just normal rock, I wouldn't have gotten rid of it, but it's part of like a masoned rock / wall that he's standing on, and I really didn't want to get in the way of that and ruin it. So I just kind of wanted to get rid of that so it would look nice and masoned and clean and all nice and all that jazz. And I keep saying nice because I'm still a little sick, so I'm lagging behind a tiny bit. So now I'm gonna dry these puppies off. Oh, technically, it's not the baby manticores. It would be cubs, and this is an adult, so it's not. It's semantics. I'm just gonna do this one mini because I'm running a little close to when I would usually do my game, and I don't want to miss that game because we're doing Tomb of Annihilation, and I'm super stoked. This one I'm not quite happy with the way I did some of the things, so because a hobby knife is going to make things a little bit too iffy for comfort, I'm just gonna do it with this baby. I just did it out of frame. That doesn't help you know what I'm talking about. There we go. I'm doing it with one of the little sanding sticks. And I am gonna re-wash it after this because of the issue that I have with the discoloration. Or, well, the sanding sticks will leave a slight residue most likely, and I want to get rid of that just so that things paint up nice. But this time I'm just gonna swish it around in both waters. Oh no, don't drop it to the bottom. That's deep. I can't get that out. But I have pliers that came with my clippers, so never mind. If you hear metal cage rattling around in the background, that is my budgie. Their name is Lunchables. Don't ask, because I'm going to tell you, but basically their name is Lunchables because my friend Jasper, after I got them, was like, hey, have you named them yet? And I was like, no. And he's like, how about Lunchables? I was like, no, I'm not naming my parakeet Lunchables. And then they kept calling my parakeet Lunchables. And then my brain went, yes, time to go home with Lunchables. And so basically my friend suggested it as a stupid suggestion, and then it stuck, and now I actually kind of like it. Now here is a better example of what I meant last time by sub-assemblies. And why this one, it could be helpful, but I can't do it. So, here, let me put on the legs. I'm just going to glue on the legs real quick. But, so there's this thing in mini painting called sub-assemblies. Now what sub-assemblies are is when they're, instead of fully assembling a miniature, you do parts of the miniature, or like you build parts of the miniature, assemble them, paint them, and then you add them to the main part. So in order to avoid any like messing up. And it's usually to give you more space to paint, because sometimes there's things that get in the way of other things you need to paint. I need to get new super glue because basically I knocked it over and then I put the cap on and then it sealed, so I have to seal it with a paper clip. And yeah, it just basically, I cut the top off, seal it with a paper clip, but then the paper clip gets stuck. But sub-assemblies are when things would get in the way of painting and all that jazz. So what you do is you just set things up separately, paint them, all that jazz. Now let's see, is there any super glue coming up into that gap? There isn't. So if you look really close, where I just put, oh, there we go. See that gap? That's an easily noticeable hole. What I'm going to do is I'm going to back that up a little bit. I'm going to whip out the baking soda. Hopefully Lunchables doesn't go nuts, because he loves the crinkling of bags for some reason. Oh no, I'm going to move this away from the mic so I don't ruin all of your, like, just headphone using days. There we go. Fresh natural. I just cut a hole in the fabric bit. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my, they have come back, mini applicators. Beautiful. Because I don't want to use too much super glue, so I'm just going to kind of shove that in the tip it over, get a bunch on here. Or better yet, do I have something disposable? Oh yes, that's the back here box. The back of the mini Manticore box. Just going to squirt some super glue on there. Get a bunch on my mini brush. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to glob it on specifically in that area. I'm just going to try to fill it without cramming any other details. Nice thing about these, if you run them off, like, if you rub them off on like something like that, you can like absorb up some of the leftovers so you don't ruin stuff. And then I'm going to take this, break up some of this, chuck it on here, tap it off, and then I'm gonna, oh no, that brush is dry now. Oh well, I'll just use a different, or brush is wet now, I'll just use a different brush. I'm gonna dust this off, and I'm gonna dust off the rest of it. Would you look at that? The hole is sort of sealed. You still know where it is, but once I paint it, it's gonna be covered up a little bit. And that's the magic of that, is you can use baking soda to instantly cure super glue that you put on in excess to seal things up and fill in gaps. And soon you'll understand why I couldn't do this in sub-assemblies. So I'm gonna put some super glue in there. I'm doing things off camera again. Shkaboomp. Shove this one in here. The thing is that, oh no, why? Why, computer screen? This is the worst time. If I press this really hard, it seals super nice. But if I don't press super hard, it leaves a gap that I could fill in. So I'm just going to take off, using my little applicator, any excess super glue that is on other bits that I don't want to react with my, what's it called? I don't want to react with the baking soda. I'm going to put this stuff on where I do want super glue to react with the baking soda. I'm going to tip this over. Oh wait, I have some over here. What am I doing? I have some on that. Take a little bit of this. I'm going to glob it on back here in this leg connection to fill that up. I need a little bit more. Thank you. I'm going to glob some of that on to fill that gap up a tiny bit. Now it's a little bit too much, so I'm going to rough it off on my paper towel. Take off a tiny bit of the excess. Work as quickly, but not rushed, as possible. And then just dump it all on. Just dump it all on. Do. I can't tell if you guys think that my all over the placeness is charismatic or obnoxious or stupid or funny or all of the above. I go into these with very set plans of I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and then it all gets ruined because I have no attention span, as characterized by my inability to ever finish a singular sentence. Now you'll see that this line is a little bit better filled than it was. It's not seamless. You could use green stuff to do a little bit of a better job, but that also takes more time, more money, and more work. None of which I have. Well, the more work I could do, but... And then there's a little bit of a seam line on the inside here, so on the inside of the leg, so I'm just going to push this super glue around where I want it, dab the excess off, and then use my little Scooby bit from my sculpting tools, and dump it in. You could use a spoon. You could use just pinching it with your fingers. You could even just use like your hobby knife or like a paintbrush to put it on. It's just that I had sculpting tools, and it gives me that little bit of precision that I want, so I use it. And a good bench line is, because sometimes you can still see the gap because the reaction is a little bit transparent, is just run your fingernail along it, or like run a tool. I use this little pin pick. It's on the other side of this, the Scooby bit, and you can just run it across. And if you feel the gap, then you know it's still there. But if you can't feel the gap, it's probably done and good. Now here is where you might want to do a sub-assembly, in that you might want to paint these two separate, because when you put them together, give me 1 second. Oof. When you put them together, you might be restricting access to the bottom of the stomach, but the nice thing about these is that this was designed with painting it in mind, so you can still access this stomach easily from multiple points and work things out. So you wouldn't need to do a sub-assembly for this. You would just need to glue it in. Now the one thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that all of these are glued down very tightly instead of filling them with doing the super glue baking soda thing. That's because, which I'm sure you've figured out by now, because it's kind of common sense, but maybe not, so I'm going to explain it. What issue you would run into is that I can seal it when I'm doing the Manticore, because all of it is the Manticore, and it's all supposed to be one big piece. The Manticore isn't supposed to be separate from itself. The thing that you run into with this, however, is this is a rock that the Manticore is on. So I'm just gonna... So you don't want seamless lines between... Oh no, why? Why? Why is it when I glue things that the screensaver thing does its stuff? You don't want lines. Or like, you don't want it to be seamless. You don't want the Manticore's feet to be merged sculpturally with the base. You just want... Because if you seal it, you run the risk of the feet looking like they're fused to the rock instead of on top of the rock, and that's because you have the things that insert. If this were a sprue model that you have to cut things out, you would just have to drill pinholes and all that jazz, but I'm just holding this while it dries because I use too much super glue. And it's also deep, so it's hard for oxygen to get to it to react, but I didn't want to use baking soda because then I would create nice seamless lines that, unless you paint carefully or remove the excess very painstakingly, it would look like you have like the feet merged with stuff. Like, because if you can see on the very inside there, on the foot, the back foot, see how there's that gap I could paint that as a shadow very easily as just, oh, there was like a hole under his feet where he was standing, or something like that. Whereas if there's a very clear, seamless line that melds his feet with the concrete, that's a little bit harder to pull off without way, way, way more work. Whereas I could just make that crack really dark and just shove it into the shadows. Whereas the other stuff is out, so it takes a little bit more work to get rid of. Another sub-assembly issue is that you could say that putting in these wings gets in the way of doing those back spikes. And if you're not a super experienced painter, which I'm not, that would be 100% correct. These wings absolutely get in the way of painting those back spikes to a really nice, just nice way. But the issue with taking these off, painting them, painting this up, and putting them on is that when you put these wings on, there's really, really bad gaps. So you would want to fill them in. And the issue with filling them in is that, well, now you have baking soda and super glue as lines between two big painted bits. And that would run some serious issues, and you would have to mask that pretty heavily in order for things to work out well. And I know I'm doing this off camera, I'm sorry, but I also need to get things to work. Now the thing is that the issue is I can make it seamless up top, or I can make it seamless down bottom. And I'm gonna do it down bottom, because up top I can push it up and make it nice, and then on the bottom I can seal it up and fix it. Actually, with the way these wings are made, I'm going to have to do it to both sides anyway and seal it up a little bit, so why not just keep going? But at this point I'm just talking and rushing a little bit because it's 6:53 and I started at like 6:05 probably, so this video is probably pretty long, and that's why I didn't want to do this video or do this redo until after I had like editing software, because I didn't want this video to be super duper long. I wanted to cut out bits for all of you guys and make things a little bit nicer, but I got to the point where it was just kind of, you know what, screw it, let's just put together the video and hope that people enjoy how long this is. And now I'm just using my mini brush to again try to direct where I want all of this super glue, because these are hefty gaps and super glue is not super easily controlled unless you're using a gel. But that being said, you're also, using a gel. There's like craft super glue that's way more liquidy and way more generally useful when it comes to model making. And this transition is now going to suck because I've crammed super glue into here, and it's something that I'm going to now have to fix post with painting and sculpting, which sucks. But that's the reality of painting minis and assembling minis, is you're going to fuck up. And the best thing you can do for yourself after fucking up is understanding that you fucked up and then trying to figure out how to fix that. Because just being upset that you fucked up, while completely reasonable, doesn't improve you whatsoever. And if improving's what you want to do, well, then obviously that's not useful for you. So the best thing to do is just go, well, shit, that's not what I want it to be. And then try your best to make it not like that. the next time you do it. I'm on crunch time. Oh no. I've been doing all of this off camera. I am deeply sorry, but clearly not sorry enough to consciously remember to not do that anymore. That's also the issue with me unintentionally fucking up my my super glue bottle. And like letting things dry and all that jazz. Because now I don't have that super skinny, precise tip that they start with. I just have the thickness of the hole and like the big chunk that I've cut it down to. So getting it in the tight cracks and spaces where I need it to go very accurately and neatly isn't going too hot. So if you have one of these and that's way too much. Now the nice thing, if you catch the super glue fuck ups early enough, just take a paper towel and just dab it, and you can get rid of a lot of the excess. I wouldn't, like I said, you have to do that quickly because obviously it's super glue, and well, super glue dries quick because now when I spread this on wide, it's not going to stick up here where the super glue was that I just wiped off. God damn it, computer. Why do you hate my guts? Oh, come on. Why must this occur? There we go. Now it's fixed. Now it doesn't stick up there. I'm dusting it off camera so I don't get it on my, camera and laptop and all my stuff. Because baking soda is very fine. And then, give me 1 second, I'm going to put my paper clip back in my super glue. If I can find the hole. But yeah, I fucked up this bottle of super glue, and it would be way easier making minis if I hadn't. But I did. So it's something that I have to deal with every day of my life, because I do this every day of my life. Which is why I started making videos. But now you can look that these arms, oh no, this is a bad time to not focus, are much cleaner. The wings actually look like they're a part of the sculpt. Like it looks, granted you can't like nitpick because it's super blurry, but everything looks like it's a cohesive piece, and that's the goal of filling in gaps like that. Sorry I didn't get to the bet here, and sorry this is so long without any editing, but I am planning on working on painting this model. The issue is that I'm going to try to do it with colors that I don't have paints for. So that's going to be an adventure and a half, because it's going to mostly entirely be with colors that I'm mixing. So we are going to see just how that turns out. Or maybe I'll do the bet here because I actually have colors for that one. Or maybe I'll buy colors. Who knows? I sure don't. If you guys didn't know, I do have a Twitter for this this account. I'm going to be putting it on. It's always in the description, but it is LGBTfling because the community and Tieflings D&D and listen. I tried to be creative and fun, but that's where I post any updates to new videos, and I'm going to probably post a poll of which one to paint next, whether it's the Demon Lord or a Space Marine that I have, or the Bone Goliath or the Manticore. So basically we're just gonna see. And thanks for tuning in. And have a nice day.